Good afternoon and welcome to the board of the University of Trinidad and Tobago, the president of the university, Professor Prakash Prasad, staff, students, invited guests, our esteemed panelists, and all of you in cyber world looking on. Today, I'd like to welcome you again to the current installment of the UTT Leadership Series presented by the Office of the President of the University. Today, we are looking at the importance of multicultural representation in establishing national policy. And without further ado, I would like to invite the President of UTT, Professor Prakash Prasad, to give you official greetings on behalf of the university.
Thank you, Dr. Francis. To the distinguished panelists, Dr. Ramprasad, Senator Timur, Mr. Arnold, Mr. Mohini, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this seminar. You all are leaders in the various fields, and particularly cultural fields and other fields. So we saw that you will make excellent representation on this most wonderful and important topic today. Now, Trinidad and Tobago is a very diverse society. It's a plural society. And therefore, for everyone to feel a part of the society, they must feel that they are represented. And the culture plays a very important part in people's lives. It defines to a large extent who they are and how they think. And therefore, in terms of national policy and culture, especially in a plural society, it is important that all segments of the society, all the various cultural streams, actually contribute towards the development of a national policy on culture. Now, it has happened to some extent, and that is good. But we need to go forward. You know, the idea if we are good, we ought to get better. And I think, therefore, it's important for us to address these issues. How do we really get representation on from all the cultural streams? So this here, I hope that the topic will stimulate discussions going beyond this series nationally, that in the formation of a national cultural policy. So again, thank you very much and a most cordial welcome to our distinguished panelists and moderator.
Thank you, Professor Prasad. And now I'd like to have a moment of silence in honor of Grand Chief of the First Peoples of Moruga, Paul Navarro, who recently passed away. Thank you. As Professor Prasad said, Trinidad and Tobago is a multi-ethnic and multicultural plural space. And today we are looking at multicultural representation in terms of national policy, but in terms also of national community. And we would like to start by defining multiculturalism in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, and then discuss how we might pivot into a more secure, more inclusive, and multicultural society, building on the strength of our diversity. With me today to discuss these interesting topics is Dr. Indrani Ramprasad, who is currently a fellow in advanced studies at the Hindu University of America and holds a master's and PhD in communication and journalism. She is a women's activist and founding president of the Hindu Women's Organization of Trinidad and Tobago, and has received the Trinidad and Tobago National Award Gold for outstanding contribution to the development of women's rights and issues in the sphere of religion and community. She is also our first state-certified female pandit, a leading scholar and an avid scholar on Ram Leela, and has published a book about the festival in North India and Mauritius in 2018. She is also a member of the research committee of the I'm not going to say it right, Adyoda Research Institute, India. Welcome, Dr. Ramprasad. We are also joined by Mr. Mbao Mohini, Chairman of the National Action Cultural Committee, who will, the committee will be celebrating its 40th anniversary on Saturday, the 26th of February. He was a former Minister of Art and Multiculturalism. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Mohini. We also have Senator Diorup Timal, who earned a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering from UWI. He was the first Vice President of the National Council for Indian Culture, the former President of the Hindu Seva Sangh Incorporated of Trinidad and Tobago. He is currently President of the Hindu...
Seva.
I refuse to butcher people's language. It's not right. Of Trinidad and Tobago, and the chairman of the International Day of Yoga Committee, also Trinidad and Tobago. And finally, but not least, Mr. John Arnold, Chief Executive Officer of the Tobago Festivals Commission Limited, who has immense experience working in culture, education, event management, and tourism, and holds a Hummingbird Medal Gold National Award for his work in culture. He has a bachelor's degree in industrial management from UWI, an executive MBA from Arthur Lockjack Global School of Business, and is currently pursuing his PhD in cultural studies at UWI. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
We're going to do kind of a round table session guided by questions. And so feel free to respond to each other as well as directly to the questions. So first up, what does it mean to you, this term multiculturalism?
I don't know who's first.
Anyone could jump in. I don't want to feel like a teacher. So what is called multiculturalism generally, and how do we see it in Trinidad specifically? Right. So anyone?
Yeah, if I may go first,
Yes.
Chairman.
Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, let me join in the condolences to the First Peoples for their loss of their Grand Chief Navarro. And if you would allow me, I'll just like to quote from an article in the Trinidad Guardian in which former Chief Navarro expressed, he said, his dying wish, the article states, was for the First Peoples to be recognized in Trinidad and Tobago for their valuable contribution. And I think it sets a tone for discussions here today, because here we have the indigenous peoples, the First Peoples, and the oldest chief is talking about recognition and recognition of their valuable contribution. To me, multiculturalism, in the specific context of Trinidad and Tobago, could be looked at as where we have diverse members of a country with several different cultures, races, religions, and ethnicities, where we can coexist peacefully and equitably in a single country without the need for assimilation into any dominant culture. And in terms of the conceptualization as a national culture, under the rubric of multiculturalism, it should be indeed more reflective of the diversity of the citizens of the country. Now, what it does bring is as a basic question is how does a nation state manage or deal with diversity? And inevitably, we'll have to go back into some of the history. I don't know if I should do that now or probably leave it a bit for further discussions. Chair?
Well, you can touch on it now, but we will be really looking at it a little bit later. I want to invite the entire panel to give
Yeah.
the
So
historical.
I think I will come that I'll come back to that at a later point and allow my fellow panelists to just express their views regarding what you have asked.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay, I could possibly comment at this point because when we speak about multiculturalism in a society such as Trinidad and Tobago, which emerged out of colonialism, out of the coming together of persons from different parts of the world, as well as the original first people. We are talking about experiences coming together from different cultural backgrounds, different experiences, different responses to those experiences. And we also have to look at the way the society evolved in as far as we would have come through slavery, indentureship, and colonization, which would have influenced the nature of the relationships that would have existed, the extent to which people would have felt a certain level of validity or invalidity with regard to their own culture, because remember that within the society, the level of acceptance, the level of prominence, the level of even a right to express one's culture would have depended a lot on where you would have come from, and in most cases as well, the question of race and ethnicity will have been critical factors in as far as that is concerned. So that is one aspect of it. The other aspect would be in terms of how, at an individual level, one is then able to respond within such an environment of multiculturalism, different cultures being there, and there remain certain legacies of superiority, inferiority, validity, and even invalidity. So that I think that would be of necessity the important factors that we would need to look at in as far as multiculturalism is concerned, and therefore how you go a step further in terms of developing a national policy that could harness, on the one hand, the human and other resource that exists, as well as provide at an individual as well as at a group level, the level of respect and confidence that would be most desirable for us to move forward if we are to be a very cohesive, organized, and progressive nation.
Thank you. More comments? Multiculturalism in Trinidad.
Yeah, well, I mean, I will jump in. I mean, my take, and I mean, this was even when we had the Ministry of Multiculturalism, is this concept of a salad bowl. I think that would be a better way for me to put it. That, you know, in the salad bowl, we have carrot, broccoli, cabbage, lettuce, and the fact that each of those are identifiable as their own individual right, but they all in the salad bowl basically mixed up as one big offering. So for me, that's always my imagery of the definition of multiculturalism. However, I think on the academic side, yes, people like Stuart Hall distinguishes very clearly between multicultural and multiculturalism. And I think it is critical for us to kind of take a look somehow as we look at this idea of how people in a space maintain their identity and their cultural unique ways, but yet live in harmony or live in a way where there's a kind of respect, as opposed to the multiculturalism where you have to define a path in terms of policy and in terms of guidelines about how we live together, how we manage conflict, how we manage contestations, how we manage everything. But at the end of the day, how we give that respect and live together. So that's my take on how I think my head works with the multiculturalism definition.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Rampersad?
Yes, if I may jump in here now, the word national itself, in terms of a national culture, always, I would see this image of the world of the colonizer, where they had this national dress, a national language, a homogeneity that they had, that they imposed in our part of the world. And we are not that, because our societies, we were thrown, as it were, into one pot. And in many ways, survival of the fittest is what operated in the beginning, either through your numbers. I mean, we see what happens to the first peoples. If they had greater numbers, perhaps they would have been more visible and would have been heard. So numbers count, and political liaisons that groups made in the beginning, early days of our arrival and settling down here. And violence, epistemic violence, is something that is really that we need to look at in our traditional worldviews that we have lost and that we're regaining now. But multiculturalism, and unlike Mr. Arnold's the salad bowl, but even in the salad bowl, you will have the colors running together. If you're throwing some beets in there, you're going to get red all over. So we're going to have a unity, an underlying kind of unity. And I kind of saw it like, we are all in that pot, and we should be seen, we should be heard, we should be tasted, and we should have an identifying aroma that tells us, this is Trini. Yeah, that's Jamaican. So you can identify something while we're all there together. And while I'm in the food and taste and so on, I want to compliment Caribbean Airlines for beginning to serve doubles and so on the airline. I always wondered, why is it we have to be so European in everything that we're doing? You go to the airport, you're seeing things to buy, are usually the big global, all over the world. You'll see these airports with brand names all over the world. And where are our people? Where is our little, kalaloo and the roti and the saltfish and bake and so on in our own space? So things like that have always disturbed me in terms of not seeing myself. And I've been doubly affected by that as a female in our society. I triply want to see myself in there. I always grew up, as a kid, I would never read a storybook that didn't have a picture of a girl in it. Because long ago, you'd always have these books only with boys' drawings. And so you want to see and hear yourself, because that's important. And, we hear what is considered national culture, and usually this urban-rural divide is there. What is national is urban, and what's happening at Queen's Hall, what's happening in Carnival in Port of Spain, not Carnival in Waterloo, or not Carnival in Moruga, is the Carnival in Port of Spain. And, in the media that dominates, that is culture. The media tells you, if they don't report you, you don't exist. So every single day of the year, Indian music is played in homes. Every weekend, you have some ritual or rite that employs this kind of music and songs that have also undergone change in our local context. But you don't hear that because that's a rural kind of expression. And school textbooks, that's another area of this multiculturalism thing we got to pay attention to. So, I'm saying we can't follow those exclusive homogeneous societies. because they are being forced to change now. Look at America today.
Yeah.
Black Lives Movement has shaken them up. And it is only after 1970 in Trinidad that one began to see a little change. It was then that you saw Indian music on TTT, and they started the Mastana Bahar programming and so on. And then you started a little bit of the African, and that has been, I think the African voice has been so muted in this whole thing. I mean, when I was going to school, Ogun Karamba, Karamba, Karamba re, Oyo yo yo borube, Ogun Karangare. Now, I don't know if I'm saying all the thing proper, but I learned that as a little 13-year-old girl at Sawan Government Circle. So in the beginning, they were beginning to help us to see and learn from each other. And suddenly that went away. And you want to read and know about the British and the Queen and so on. Never really attracted me. So, you know, that's my view. I want to be seen. I want all of us to be seen, to be heard, you know. So that's my little piece there.
Thank you.
Means to me.
And or you were going to say something, Senator?
Yeah, if I may, I know that Pandita she mentioned about survival of the fittest. And in terms of all what she outlined there, I think we have to bear in mind, I mean, yes, survival of the fittest, but in terms of the evolution of our culture here in Trinidad and Tobago, it was based on definitive policies of the state from since the times of independence and maybe a couple of years before independence, because the state adopted policy was one of monoculturalism, and that monoculturalism, in the lines of liberal democracy, was assimilation was to take place in the crucible of a melting pot, the melting pot concept that was quite prevalent in a lot of nation states around that period of time, where nations were trying to discover themselves and establish pathways along which they would develop. And in terms of the whole melting pot concept, it was a question of social and cultural integration, where the tendency was to homogenize the collective of citizens and assume a common national culture. And that monocultural model took the form of cultural nationalism, with a model of mainly Afro-Creole cultural forms and values, mainly Festival of Carnival and the arts forms of Calypso and Steel Band. And later on, we saw the addition of the Best Village folk art entering the national stage. So I think what this entire thing set up for us here in Trinidad and Tobago was a hegemony, and a hegemony under the rubric of a national culture, and also a hegemony that was greatly facilitated, financed by the state. And all the vast resources of the state was brought to bear on this model, this assimilative model, this monocultural model. And all private corporations and businesses joined this model that we were working with. Private and public institutions, you know, educational institutions like the University of the West Indies and other institutions, and in particular the media as well, which Pandita Indrani mentioned. And coming out of it, it seems as though everybody was expected to conform with this model. And multiculturalism challenges this model. It challenges model, not in any formal way coming through our history, but it challenges model because some of the groups here in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly the Indo-Trinidadian-based groups and the Hindu-based groups, outside of this model, persisted in retaining valued aspects of their culture and heritage. And there was a consistent persistence to have these recognized and respected as valid inputs into a truly national culture. And I think it was this cultural persistence that led to the underpinnings of multiculturalism in Trinidad and working towards a more diverse cultural policy. And I agree with Mr. Arnold, it led to, it's leading to, because I still believe we are very much in a transition phase. The toss salad concept where the diverse members of society can maintain their particular identities whilst we reside in a collective. Now, the other factor is that I think what has shaped the policy and the direction is that it is closely linked with the politics of the country. I don't think we can get away from that. It's closely linked with the politics of the country. And the politics has been dominated by two major ethnic groups. And it's more in the realm of identity politics. And the monocultural hegemonic melting pot that dominated from the days of independence under the PNM governments. I think there was just a one period where the NAR was in power from 1986 to 1991. Adopted this model of managing the diversity, and we see the multicultural model beginning to gain some form of ascendancy with the coming into the power of the UNC in 1995. That was in coalition with the NAR and then with the PP government in 2010 to 2015. And actually in 2012 to 2015, we saw the formation of the Ministry of Arts and Multiculturalism. And fellow panelist Mohini was a minister in that particular ministry. And also very interesting, we saw the establishment of the Ministry of National Diversity and Social Integration. So I think when we look at a bit of the history and the factors shaping that history, multiculturalism is a relatively new concept, a new phenomenon in TNT. I mean, it has been around and all of those things, but it is gaining a bit of ascendancy now. And what I would note about it, it has not been a consistent policy and a consistent practice in Trinidad. We are transitioning, but the dominant cultural model is still that assimilative, hegemonic model of monoculturalism.
So I want to jump in just on something my brother Timal said. His analysis is, by the way, spot on. But I just want to add a few things. I think it's important to note that multiculturalism, I think, in my opinion, was always the intent, I think, of the political statements, but I'm not too sure it was implemented. So, for example, I mean, going back when Eric Williams would have said, "No mother India, no mother Africa, no mother England," because he also talked about, the loyalty to England. And there's only one place, really, the idea of all of us in Trinidad, we have to be one people. So I think the intent, I want to make sure that we insert that into the history statement, because I think the intent was there. However, I totally agree with you with the concepts of monoculture and political hegemony, because I think those are really instructive right through as to how that happened. One last thing I want to put in is that I think that even beside political hegemony, I think that there are certain, I want to say maybe catchments, certain communities, certain groupings that practiced, right, in their own in their own way the idea of multiculturalism. And so I don't want to throw that away. And I also would come later on in the discussion to talk about even currently, Tobago, for example, which is pretty much homogeneous at this time, now has to put that on the table, right? Because the society is shifting once again. We now have the first mandir that's going to be built. We have about 2 mosques, right? So the whole nature of Tobago has to be understood in that regard. The last point I want to add inside all of the Callaloo discussion is the two kind of hierarchies that operate all the time. On the political, cultural, yes, there tends to be a lot of Afro-Creole concentration. And then on the commerce and business, we have the Indo. And some people, of course, argue, how do we get that whole equality thing to happen throughout all of these, or how do we manage these hierarchies that operate? So I think the multiculturalism challenge is a big, big one. And I hope in distilling these thoughts as we go in this discourse, that we certainly can make some suggestions as to how policy can guide us moving forward.
Thank you. I want to jump in. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Ramprasad.
Yeah, go ahead, Kayla.
I do want to jump in, piggyback a little bit off of what Dr. Ramprasad said earlier, that the erasure of the African voice. I want to make the point, and you can disagree with me, but the default or common culture in Trinidad and Tobago is actually Eurocentric.
Yes.
And the things that were put forward as exhibiting culture in Trinidad and Tobago were the things that could be closely associated with a Eurocentric aesthetic or idea. And you mentioned carnival, and Dr. Ramprasad also mentioned that we only focus on Port of Spain carnival, but we only focus on the aspects of carnival that we can claim have a French origin, even if they don't. So we're still in a space where the hegemony that we are experiencing is quite Eurocentric. And I wanted to make that point because I think it is important to a discussion of true multiculturalism and how it manifests in Trinidad and Tobago. We do need to recognize that the major ethnicities in Trinidad and Tobago are all on the margin in our de facto life.
I can buy that.
I would like to agree with
I can buy that.
I would like to agree with Dr. Francis on that point that we are largely still influenced by that the original influences, the foundation under which the society was built. And if we are talking about multiculturalism, you are also talking not just about an African or an Indian or any other ethnic group participating in some form of art or what have you. You must attach that to the level of respect that is given to the individuals or the groups that may promote a particular form of cultural activity. And if you look at take the African, for instance, and even the Indian, okay? Prior to 1970, these art forms were highly disrespected. As a matter of fact, it is true a lot of the work that was done by NJAB that there was some measure of transformation. Take, for instance, the Calypso art form, which was considered something only for Carnival. So that from the time Ash Wednesday
I think his reception is going.
Yes.
Maybe whilst we're waiting for Mr. Mohini.
No, actually, he's gone mute. Yeah.
But he does look frozen. So I'd like to ask Ms. Dr. Ramprasad to make the contribution she was going to make, and hopefully he will come back in to finish what he was saying.
I feel very deeply, having considered this thing for many years, patriotism. I don't feel that we are so patriotic because I guess the holiday falls outside of school. So we don't have that thing happening in the schools where the kids have a feeling of patriotism. Because if you have that feeling, you're more likely to see all of us, as one. And that, all my years I'm looking, I find that is so weak in Trinidad.
Okay, could I come in now?
Yes, please continue.
Yeah. Okay. Along that same line of the question of patriotism, as I mentioned earlier, the question of respect. What is needed is a philosophy of inclusion, where that philosophy could be introduced and promoted through the schools, through the society, that we recognize the value, not of the art, but of the person who is creating the art. The steel pan was marginalized. Why? Because it came out of certain areas, and it was described in the statute books of this country as a noisy instrument. In other words, who created it? Where did it come from? And it was devalued. If you are talking multiculturalism, you cannot move forward without a philosophy of inclusion, a philosophy of respect for all individuals, all sectors of the society. And I could remember a year ago, 2 years ago, when NJAC was observing the 50th anniversary, and the Archbishop got up in the service that we had, and he said that the revolution is not completed because there are certain areas that are just dispossessed, high levels of poverty, high levels of crime, and sufficient is not being done to ensure that the whole society, the whole nation could move forward in a greater sense of unison, as a result of which, yes, you may have an individual or some individuals making some progress in a particular form of art, but the overall, by and large, the communities have not grown, have not progressed, and as a result, that multiculturalism that we are talking about is not going to move forward until we spread our wings, accept and respect each and every ethnic group, and starting at the individual level, recognize and respect the individual, respect the community, do more to ensure that the young persons are educated properly, that they understand their history and the history of our nation and the history of their communities, right? Because fantastic persons have come out of all communities in Trinidad and Tobago. What do we do to get the value that these persons represent back into their communities, right? Again, too, you could mention Tobago to some extent, and you could also mention areas like Junction and Lavantil, where persons, they become qualified, they believe they have achieved something, and they just move out of these communities. And there is no effort on our part, collectively, to ensure that the value that these people could offer is given back to their respective areas, to their respective communities. Before you could even talk about having that policy that we talk about, cultural policy, national policy for culture, right? Because it has to come not just from a few individuals, It is something that has to emerge out of the participation of the communities, of the broadest levels of our population, so that it could really and truly be meaningful and could bring the level of respect that we need.
Okay, thank you. I think we've actually started drifting into and addressing question 3, but just let me pause for a moment before we continue to let our viewers know that we were supposed to be joined by Chief Ricardo Barat Hernandez, Chief of the Santa Rosa First Peoples, and unfortunately he could not attend today because he was expected to, well, he attended the funeral for Chief Navarro. And I know they wanted to bring up specific things about policy, which I hopefully we can work in when we get down a little late in the conversation. But just to bring it back, right now, we are actually discussing one of the questions, what are the gaps or shortfalls in a Trinidadian multicultural approach? And I want to spend a little more time on why do they exist. So the history behind this exclusive, by default, Eurocentric society that we have. So now, Senators, it's time for us to really delve into the history of why we are here, because I believe understanding the history of how we got here can help us untangle the issues that we currently have.
Yeah, so Chairman, thank you. Again, I would respectfully want to have a difference of opinion with Mr. Arnold. You know, when I went a bit into the history of it all, because coming out of the Eurocentric model, there has been a definitive Creole model, particularly along the lines of Afro-Creole traditions and practices. But what I said, what evolved here in Trinidad, particularly, and what we consider to be indigenous. But the reason I say that is because if the intent was there for that multicultural approach historically, then I would submit then it was extremely badly managed and extremely badly implemented.
And we agree on that.
Because it's far away from the actual concept of multiculturalism. But coming back to what you specifically asked, Chair, is that, yes, in terms of gaps and shortfalls and those things, is that, you know, we're transitioning. We're moving away from a dominant hegemonic multicultural model that I spoke about. We are going into multiculturalism. But as I said, I've seen in the past, maybe some governments have said, okay, we're adopting this model because ministries were created to look at national diversity and multiculturalism. It was changed again. I'm not saying that the intent is not there. Please don't get me wrong. I think maybe the intent is there, of course, but it has probably been allocated to different ministries in different ways to achieve the same thing. But with the lack of a clear multicultural agenda, to say this is what we want as a nation, this is our multicultural policy. I mean, we're talking about a national cultural policy, but to me, it has to be informed by a clear multicultural policy. And not only in terms of culture, but that would also inform national policies with regards to education. I think Brother Mohini mentioned about education in what he was saying. Education is a major field in terms of getting our multicultural agenda once it's sorted out, getting it initiated in education. There's also social development, social justice, social development, economic development, and opportunities for all. So it covers a wide spectrum of national policies. And so do we go specifically and say, okay, that we have a clear policy, a clear agenda on multiculturalism? But inherent in that, there are also dangers. And I think we also have to be conscious of potential dangers, because we don't want to come away that multiculturalism privileges only certain groups.
That's right.
Over the common good, because there is a common good we aspire to as a nation. We don't want national unity to become a difficult and unachievable goal. And if people see themselves as members of cultural, ethnic, or racial groups. But we have to be able to ensure that multiculturalism still ensures that citizens sees themselves not as rivals vying for a piece of the national pie, but we have shared experiences, we have shared aspirations, and multiculturalism should not only be looking at the differences, but multiculturalism agenda must, and it is of extreme importance, that within that agenda that we must explore our common values and our common aspirations. And those should form part of the cultural agenda. It's not just only about the different groups receiving the recognition and the respect and the inclusion, but also there has to be a national vision within it all, in which we see ourselves as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and all our cultures. There are so many commonalities that we can subscribe to. There are so many commonalities in values and practice, our hopes for our family, our hopes for the future generations, that we can all identify very strongly with. So that I think the challenge in terms of one of the shortfalls would be for us to meet that challenge, to ensure that we are pursuing this path, not at the expense of our common good, and not at the expense of not sharing our experiences, not allowing others to share in our culture and our experiences, and not allowing ourselves to allow others to be strengthened by those who are strong, and not allowing ourselves not to work together as citizens of this country, together, to bring about the future that we all envision for our country.
Thank you. Anyone else? Shortfalls and how did we get here?
Well, my 2 cents. I want to bring it back to my own experience in Tobago, because I'm going to make sure I make those points about Tobago at some point in this conversation, because I think it's really critical. I think one of the things, if you look at the current cultural policy, national policy, cultural policy, there's an area where they talk about one of the areas that must be fixed is what they call cultural confidence. The fact that we've got to address that as a nation, that we have a kind of cultural confidence about our identity, who we are as a people, and that we recognize that we all are striving for equal rights and recognitions. And I think that has been one of the gaps, I feel, in my own analysis, in us moving forward with this whole concept of how we drive the thing. Now, being honest, the opening of the media, I think, has been a big plus. The idea that there's no more hybridity in terms of experimentation. And I noted where you said, Keela, that yes, a lot of people are, and we still have that Eurocentric, totally agree. But I think there's an attempt by several quarters to move that in several other directions. And there's a kind of strengthening of that also taking place. So if I was to identify one gap that I think, and that maybe a shortfall, would be this whole area of cultural confidence. Added, of course, to what Brother Mohini said about the inclusion.
Thank you. Mr. Mohini or Dr. Ramprasad, would you like to jump in? Shortfalls and how did we
I believe that the shortfalls would arise by somewhat a failure to recognize the need for positive action and positive intervention, believing that things are just going to work themselves out in the best way that we would desire. And Mr. Timal raised some very valid points there, but what I want to look at is some of the influences affecting, for example, the politics, okay, and the use of race and ethnicity for political gain, which is something that is difficult to address. And this is why I say that it's so important that there be a more continuous intervention so that there could be some kind of counterbalance to the negative influences where politics is concerned. Also the question of wealth, which aligned to wealth, you'd have also privilege, and that privilege would go not only in terms of bread and butter, but also in terms of one's validity within the community, and therefore the validity of one's culture. And I can remember how difficult the March to Colony was in 1970, which we are going to observe on the 12th of March, right? Where it was the most difficult march in terms of the efforts that were made to disrupt it. So much so that on the 13th of March, the headlines in the Guardian was March to Colony incident-free. In other words, there were genuine efforts to polarize the ethnic groups within the society, something that I personally experienced on the march to Charlottesville as well, when we were hearing that, okay, this was going to be a very big march, and reinforcements would have come from Trinidad. And who did they send? 90% Indian police officers, and made an effort to stop the march, to create some kind of racial conflict, which we were able to manage, to avoid, because it came very, very close to that. After 60 miles of marching in the Hudson, the police intervened to stop the march. And that was done, there's no doubt about it, to draw a wedge between the Indians and the Africans. So at a political level, there has been that effort of division, which sometimes may seem accidental, but which is usually calculated, right? As I experienced in that effort to create a bloodbath in order to divide the races. And that march came after the March to Colony, and because of the growing unity, because that was one of the strong policy lines of the organization, unite the nation. So that the point I am making is that we cannot expect a multicultural society of value and worth unless people like ourselves continuously and continually intervene in different ways, as I said, at the community level, at the level of education, at the level of whatever level it is, right? In order to get across to the population the need for us to respect each other as individuals, as groups. Then you're going to respect the other person's culture. And all cultures ought to be taught in the schools so that from the young and tender ages, our people could grow in learning about each other's culture each other's, because that culture is basically is valid for all ethnic groups, because your culture emerges out of your experiences, out of the way in which you responded to challenges for survival and all the other challenges that you have encountered, and therefore they are all valid and all need to be taught and all need to be respected. And in so do, and we love it, we love all. If we are left naturally, we love all. We are willing to participate with each other. But it's not going to happen in the manner in which would be beneficial to all ethnic groups, and it would not happen in the manner in which it would be desirable if we are to have a progressive and productive society where each and everyone could feel that sense of commitment to the building of their community, until and unless we begin to ensure that we intervene, that we discuss, and that we share. That is my position.
Thank you. I think Dr. Ramsad. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, honey. The education curriculum, that really has to be revised to suit our needs. Cultural literacy, reading. Take the East-West corridor, for example. We know we have some issues there. Let's deal with it. Reading, literacy. When you use books for teaching, to teach kids to read, it has to be in a cultural context. We are not even aware. Our teacher training and so on doesn't even go that way. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We could get all of that. I mean, I taught in New York high schools, so I'm not saying off the top of my head. We use particular books for teaching, like immigrant kids. It's a different kind of reading, cultural literacy. So if your kids can't identify with what you're teaching them to read, come on, there's a big disconnect. So I would say that curriculum and the cultural literacy. I still remember with pain. Reading things that were not nice about me as a Hindu. I remember with pain. And as I said, epistemic violence on us. Now, the CXC religious education syllabus has been a big, I would say, a big step in helping to educate the Caribbean about each other. My only concern is they have taken 3-4 major religions. First, they had Christianity for many years, and that changed recently to include Islam and Hinduism and Judaism. I don't know how many Jews you got in the Caribbean to have a specialty for them when African traditional religions are left out. And we've been trying to say, hey, where's the specialty for African religions? Because you can take a paper one that teaches you about everybody. Everybody has to do that. And I find that so wonderful in terms of getting to know each other. And here it is serious business. You're getting to know the world of that person, the worldview of the person. And then you specialize in one of the areas. But a stern African child in the Caribbean cannot specialize in Caribbean, African traditional religions. So, and that's a big, look at it, the whole Caribbean, come on. So we really need to correct those things. I'm saying, but I'm inside of it. So I know that it is a really powerful tool. Kids are learning about Rastafari and so on. We don't know about our neighbors. We don't know about neighbor. You come in the area and you say, show me a mandir, and they show you a mosque. A lot of times you can't tell the difference. And I want to say too, in terms of the Hindu, we are very misunderstood because we are not a religion with a book and 10 rules. We are a dharma. Dharma means something different. And if anybody if people would take away that from my contribution, I'd be so happy. Dharma means it's a righteous duties and responsibilities for living harmoniously in a society to suit your times, to suit your circumstances, to be in harmony with the environment and everything around you. So it's not a religion like that. And that's why sometimes we find it hard to fit in the categories. You see, this is a cultural thing. And I'm coming with my religious kind of element. And you say, hey, you don't fit in here. Because you brand me as that as religion. And for me, it is both. It is my cultural expression. It's my worldview, how I interact with the world. Take, for example, Ram Leela, and it was Derek Walcott who made the point in his Nobel speech. He said, if he knew the languages more, the languages of these Indians that he had met in Trinidad, he's 1/8 the man that he would have been, the writer that he would have been. He's 1/8 the writer now, but would have been more if he knew the languages of the Indians that he met later on. Because first he spoke, and that is a text that everybody in the Caribbean should be reading. Every school child should read that. He talks about us coming from broken backgrounds and putting together like a pot. And all where it's broken is the kintsugi art of Japan, where they take the golden mix, and they join back the vase. So you're putting more love into recouping your traditions. And that's, Deruji's of the National Council of Indian Culture, and they have done a phenomenal job. So is NJAC phenomenal in helping people to recoup their traditions with that love and the pain. He talks about the white marks in the cracks, the glue, the white glue that brings it together. Of course, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor again for the colonial background. But if I could make every Caribbean person read that text, it should be in the syllabus. So in a nutshell, the curriculum has to be revised, cultural literacy, make those texts relevant to the kids in their particular circumstances, and teacher education. We have to revamp that, let them be relevant. Thank you, Kayla.
Thank you. I just want to make 2 points. Well, 3 really. One, in response to the senator, I would like to share a quote I recently heard, that there's an implementation gap in Trinidad and Tobago. And not just in terms of culture, but in many of our policies as well. We have good intentions, we write it down on paper, and we just assume that people think like this and it will get done. And that has been a problem for longer than most of us have been alive, I am going to say with some surety.
That was from Dr. Nurse?
Yes.
Because he has that concept called IDD, Implementation Deficit Disorder.
Yes. I heard it in a UE symposium I was just in. 2.
But it's true.
It is true. On all levels, not just in terms of thinking about multiculturalism, either multicultural de facto or multiculturalism de facto. Also, we've actually drifted into question 4, so you're doing my job for me, and thank you. Looking at what can we do as individuals, communities, and as nations to achieve a more equitable and multicultural society. And I would like to, if I may, share from the individual perspective an anecdote from my childhood. When I was 3 months, so this is told to me, this is part of my mythology, let me say that. When I was about 3 months, I had maljo very bad. Was not eating, was getting sick, wasting away. And my mother, educated in the Western style, took me to doctor after doctor after doctor, until one doctor said, hey, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but this is not a physical thing. You need to see about this some other way. And being educated as she was in that Western style, she had forgotten her roots. And so it wasn't until my aunt, who is Googler, which is part of the story, said, I know this Pundit. Come, he will help. And they sped across, they took me there, and he prayed over me with a peacock feather, and he flipped out the evil spirits. And as he was doing his ritual, he was telling my mother, I don't understand. You Africans have the same thing. We do this. You put the 3 dots and you put the the jet, the jet beads. We do that to ward off evil spirits, but you all have your traditions too. And I've always used that story as an example of how multiculturalism in a plural society could work, right? You have a way of solving a problem that I might not remember or that has been forced out of me through hegemony, but works. And it's easy then for you to share your solution with me. So when we're talking about, Senator, you're talking about not just the differences, but the similarities. We have a lot more in common than we realize. And I wanted to also mention that part of the problem is that we have not begun truly to decolonize ourselves. And so that divide and conquer that we have inherited in our political system, that we've inherited in our cultural dealings, is still pretty much how we function, because we have yet to accept the trauma of our history and how we move past the trauma of our history, right? And so I want to invite now contributions from the panel on how, as individuals, as communities, so in our religious groups, in our villages, and as a nation, how do we work towards getting multiculturalism off the ground? And I'd also like to remind our audience, please feel free to ask questions via the YouTube chat. I know there's it's easier if you subscribe to the UTT channel, so please don't be afraid. Look at the beautiful content you're getting to see anyway. So post your questions in the chat and we will address your questions shortly. Thank you. So panel, go ahead.
Chairman, if I may, I think we seem to be following a certain order. But I just want to, in terms of that experience you just shared, I'm happy that you shared that experience. And Pandita Indrani also shared some of her experiences. And listening to you and just to reinforce the point that multiculturalism is not only about exploring differences, but a large responsibility lies with identifying our shared and common values and contributions that could be made. And Pandita Indrani mentioned the fact of the African religions not being recognized in terms of the formal religions, in terms of the CXC syllabus. And it brings up a point that I would like to raise that I think we must address. You see, when I look at past cultural policies, national policies coming out from respective governments, is that there's a tendency to say there's a tendency to focus on what is classified as the cultures that are indigenous to Trinidad and Tobago, what has evolved and are considered indigenous. I think we do ourselves a great disservice when we take that approach. And I think any approach, any way going forward, any policy must broaden that approach, because the only indigenous cultures really are the first peoples. We all came, all other groups came here. The first peoples were here, they are indigenous, and we have all been subjected to the battering effects of colonialism. We have had to modify, we have had to adapt, we have had to create ways of expressing ourselves and finding our sense of belonging in this country. And I think when we say we focus on indigenous, what has evolved here, it is really a disservice. Because, for instance, when you were speaking, what ran through my mind is, in the African tradition, there's the concept of Ubuntu. And then Pandita was speaking about the concept of Dharma. And in my research, there are so many similarities between the concept of Ubuntu and Dharma, where you're conscious of the other aspects of the creation and the relationships you have to develop. And as you grow, you don't grow individually, you grow because of the efforts of others. And your growth is not individualized only. You should take others with you in your growth. And you should be conscious of the impact of your growth on others, in that it should be in what we call a dharmic sense of responsibility or harmonious, because then we progress at the expense of others. So there are so many profound similarities in our traditions. And so if we go to stick with indigenous, to me it excludes all the treasures, all the civilizational treasures that are there in the respective traditions that could contribute to our growth and development. And the other thing is that in keeping with that same concept, at the risk of overemphasizing a point, is that the multiculturalism in lines of that, it goes against linear compartmentalization of the respective traditions that we have. And really and truly, I've seen some multicultural models and policies of other countries along those lines. But I think because of our history, because of our composition, religious, ethnic, and otherwise, we have to be aiming for a hybrid type multicultural model, a hybrid type multicultural model in which just not only the best interest of the respective groups, but a model that would give us the national good. And if I may just share one anecdote, many years ago, not so many, but a couple of years ago, I was on Diwali Day. I was driving down the Eastern Main Road trying to pick up something that my wife had forgot to buy. And when I got to Hussein's Roti shop in Tunapuna there, I saw a long line of persons, really long line of persons. And I was wondering, but today's a public holiday, what is Hussein's doing open? And then when I looked, I saw a lot of my African brothers and sisters in that line, and I was saying, well, and then it hit on me. I say, oh shucks, the persons were there to buy the roti and curry and stuff from Hussein's because we had reached a point where others want to share in the experiences of others, and they want to participate in the festivals of others. And I remember, and I see how many persons light the years for Diwali who are not Hindus. They have an Indian meal in their home, and also NCIC has a festival called the Rainbow Dance Festival, which we normally put on at Independence Day. And it's fascinating to see, the Chinese, the dragon dance, the dance of the Syrian Lebanese community, the dance, the African dances and the drummers, and then the Indian dances and all those things. And it's referred to as the Rainbow Festival of Dance because it's such a beautiful experience to see, these various dances. So like Brother Mohini was saying and Mr. Arnold, we have all these things. It is there. We have been sharing. There's a fair amount of cross-fertilization where we benefit from each other's experiences and culture. That has been going on for quite a while. The challenge, as you have rightly identified, is implementation. But of course, is how can we harness that in a definitive, continuous policy that would harness all that has been happening informally in our communities and informally amongst us, and bring all of these things and harness it into that multicultural pattern, that agenda that we are talking about.
Thank you.
And I hear they say they're going in the order, so I think it's Mohini.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Rampersad had raised the question of the differences and the similarities, which is so very important. But another aspect of it that we need to look at is how do we inculcate, and I go back to the schools, and we talk about the youth, but we also need to talk about the children at even a younger age. How do we inculcate within them that aspiration, that vision of a more cohesive, multicultural, united society. And these things only happen by providing them with the images that show them the possibilities, by showing them that those who were there before them are willing to do something, to sometimes supersede what they may be hearing sometimes in the very homes. Because especially during the high political period, right? Within the homes, sometimes there are very negative statements made about different ethnic groups within the society. So we need to be able to do things to give them a different vision. And that hope and that aspiration that they themselves could believe that this is something worthwhile that that they would want to experience in their lifetime. And sometimes by going that extra mile, because I could remember when we started to observe Emancipation Day, something that may not be known by many persons in this country. At that time, I don't think there was any observance of Indian Arrival Day. And we started to observe Indian Arrival Day, and it just began to spread to the point that there's a holiday for it today. And while we have always promoted Indian African unity, a lot of people believe that MJAC was just African, which was not quite correct. But the point being that you could present in Emancipation Day, you could present Indian Arrival Day, you could present different cultural norms, and by so doing, begin to set an example that others could follow. But I hold very strongly that we need to do more within the schools so that the knowledge that our youngsters gain, it would give them that broader vision and that greater opportunity and desire to see something more worthwhile and cohesive within the society. But it has to be at that level.
Thank you. Mr. Arnold or Dr. Ramprasad?
Yes, I wanted to make a quick point, just quick. When Senator was speaking about his experiences, 1980s, way back, the PNM Women's Group, when Diwali had just, taking up the holiday, and the PNM Women's Group had a Diwali barbecue advertised. And then I wrote against it. And do you know that they canceled the project when they understood that, hey, the barbecue thing doesn't, if you said veggie barbecue, a veggie Q, yes, but it didn't sync with Diwali. And that was such a good moment that another group could understand you and not and sync with it. And Ghansham is saying it happened last year. But more education, yeah, we got to educate. And I remember walking through the streets of Shigwanas for an Indian Arrival Day some years back. And all the people I saw wearing Indian clothes were my brothers and sisters of African origin. More of them were wearing Indian clothes on the street than the Indians that I saw. So something is happening nice. Something beautiful is happening.
And it happens vice versa too, eh?
Yes.
Right, I've seen it. So I guess I'm last after. So a number of things I want to just drop inside the pot here. One, and then Bahu could bear me out on that. I come from Tobago. In Tobago, where I grew up, we didn't know Indian and Negro. We didn't know those two things at all. We went to town, Lal. We need something, we go by Lal. We go by Jatan for roti. We just didn't know what that was. I think the whole concept of race only came up maybe in the last, Moeen, would you say the last 15?
It has been exacerbated within the last 15 years.
Yeah, right. So I think, yeah, I would put somewhere there where people, so it is a very serious imperative that we address this whole concept that we're addressing here of multiculturalism, because I think everybody is on board. Education, inclusion, cultural confidence. Keela made another good point there. Oh my gosh, it's slipping me. But all of those elements are critical if we're going to talk, or implementation. Yeah, are critical if we're going to be talking about creating policy or creating some kind of framework for us to move harmoniously together. Recently, for example, I'm working on I would agree to disagree with Timal on definition of indigenous. Because for me, I think the indigenous, that's one definition in terms of the Maori people, the early people. But I think there's also an indigenous, which has to do with the characteristic of something that originates in a particular locale. So for me, I call Pan indigenous. It wasn't there before. So for me, I call it indigenous. But that's an aside. We can agree to disagree on that. The issue of finding, and I think Dr. Ramprasad is on the ball, the education might be one pathway, but that education has to be way down below at the kindergarten, not at the primary it has to start way below. I made that point about service delivery recently in another forum, that if we're talking about service to deliver to tourists and to people and so on, if we're concentrating on putting wine in old bottles, we might have a problem. We need to go right back to the kindergarten to get a new pool of people coming up to have that. So I would think that, I think we have touched on all the major things, in my estimation, that we would need to move forward. I called Mongal Patasa recently and said, Mongal, I want to do a fusion of the sitar and the tabla with the Tobago tambourine, right? So these things are happening individually. It's happening in communities. People are doing all kinds of, but what we need now is like, I think Timal said it, or no, Dr. Ramprasad, we need to formalize these things and start to document them in such a way that we can implement with the political persons who are in charge.
Yes. I want to pick up on Dr. Ramprasad. Earlier in the conversation, you were talking about the education's approach to teaching, for example, religions in the Caribbean. I also want, I'm piggybacking off of that to raise, on behalf of the chief, one of the concerns they had specifically about policy, and that is how national policy doesn't always reflect specific cultural or religious practices. Specifically, they were talking about the hunting season, and while we understand the hunting season is there to protect the animal population, if your religious practices include certain sacrifices or of that nature, then it is restrictive and I'm having a senior moment.
Don't worry.
Leave that for me, honey.
Derogatory, not derogatory, discriminatory. There, we got it. I got it. Right. It's not just neglectful, it's discriminatory. And I do harp a lot on the idea that a lot of this comes out of our colonial heritage. For example, if we're talking about laws and policies embedded in our constitution, because we negotiated our independence, We did not have a revolution. We negotiated our independence. So embedded in our constitution today are laws that come from the colonial period. And if we're starting with that foundation, our thinking still comes from the colonial period. And this affects everybody. And I want to move beyond ethnicity as a source of culture to orientation as a source of culture, age as a source of culture, economic status as a source of culture. If we want to broaden the idea of multiculturalism, not just looking at our cultural, our physical cultural products like dance and music, but also the attitudes, the understandings, the worldviews that are impacted by age, by how much money is in your pocket, you know, by where you grew up, where you live, what you've seen. And just to broaden that idea that when we start to talk about education, not just showing people an example, well, this is a classical Indian dance, look at it. So now you know what it looks like. To actually teaching appreciation, understanding that you might not do this dance yourself, but isn't it beautiful, like something you do? And isn't it worth enjoying watching? And look at it. This is what it means to your neighbors. This is what it should, you know, it could mean to you. And having a deeper understanding than just recognizing it. Though, to be honest, we are not at the recognition stage yet, to be completely truthful. I saw recently a friend of mine posted a picture of 2 pages from our social studies book about Carnival, and the misinformation about what is supposed to be a national festival, far less the misinformation that would be in a textbook like that about ethnic festivals, things that, you know, we might marginalize because it doesn't necessarily put $1 in your pocket. Imagine that is what is in our school right now. How do we transition from this lovely passion that we're exhibiting here, that we should have multicultural policy? How do we then, I don't want to use the term force, but encourage the political system to adopt it outside of elections? How do we get involved?
Continue more of this.
I want to propose, Madam Chair, a post-colonial review of the Constitution, some aspects of the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, and the education curriculum of Trinidad and Tobago. Let's do that from a post-colonial perspective. That could be a follow-up.
Yeah, Pandita, I salute your genuine intentions. in the context of the identity politics that we look at that is prevalent in Trinidad, and the fact that that leads to fairly close results. Constitutional reform it's uppermost in the minds of, I think, all our citizens, but in terms of reality and political reality, well, I think maybe that's subject for another part of this.
Yeah.
How the possibilities are. I just want to, in terms of what Dr. Francis was saying, and I remember our brother Ricardo Barat Hernandez, who is not here today. I was at some forum and I heard him said that anytime he attends any talk on multiculturalism, all he hears about is Africans and Indians. These are not his exact words, but I'm just trying to paraphrase the intent behind what he said. And he was referring to, of course, the almost, the lack of consideration for First Peoples. And then also, I think we have to recognize the Chinese community, the Syrian Lebanese community, who have been here. I mean, the Chinese came here in the system of indenture, which is not well known amongst a lot of people, but they have been here. They have a marked presence here, and their contributions have been quite extensive and genuine. So, we have to look at not only the 2 dominant groups, but of course the other minorities. And maybe in this regard, particularly in terms of, we were talking about reform of laws and all those things. I think it's imperative for us as a country, particularly for the First Peoples, and hearing the cry of the Chief Navarro about recognition for their contribution. I think we have to consider as a country actually bringing legislation in place to safeguard and protect that heritage, and to have that contribution and that heritage translated into our education system and all of those things. Because I think there are still textbooks around that refer to our First Peoples as savages. And there are books around that refer to our indentures as heathens and these sorts of things. And yeah, we need a radical overhaul of those things, you know, and full recognition for the other minorities who unfortunately are more or less left out of the political scenario. I just want to bring to the attention of everyone.
Derek J, before you move to your next point, on this very point you just made, the Ministry of Education recently published a textbook for the higher education levels and up to the first year or so of the university that covers all the ethnic groups in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay,
it's a
thanks.
New book.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I was going on to say that actually a national policy on culture and the arts, 2019 to 2024, that's the time period it was stated, titled Celebrating National Identity, Maximizing Our Diversity. It was laid in Parliament on February 12, 2020. And it was laid as a green paper for public comment. I thought I'll mention that because there is a definitive policy that was laid in Parliament as a green paper for public comment. And although I view this as a step in the right direction, it is definitely a significant step. But as Dr. Francis and other fellow panelists have been saying, is that we need a more comprehensive multicultural agenda beyond the performing arts and beyond the festival arts, beyond this, the song and the dance and the festival arts and all of those things. Multiculturalism must inform national policy accordingly across all sectors. And we have spoken a lot about education, but also I think we need to delve more deeply at maybe other forums in terms of communications and media, social development, social equality, social justice, and of course, economic development, in which everyone can be feel confident, you know, that there are the opportunities available on an equitable basis for their economic growth and development. And if I just close, I say that, you see, in my view, it's not about sharing a space. Because when we talk about sharing a space, we enter into the realm of contestation. And who gets part of this space and who gets part of this space, and it becomes a contest. But now that is a reality. Yeah? I don't think we can ignore that reality. That is a reality. But I think we always have to keep at the back of our minds, you know, multiculturalism is to maximize, it should be aimed to maximize the full potential of the space that we share. We have very, very far to go. We think our space is limited and we need to contest amongst ourselves for the resources within that space. But we have to be looking at the tremendous opportunities for expansion of that space because of our creativity and our innovation that we have shown over the decades as a people. And of course, rooted in a sense of shared belonging to our nation.
Thank you.
Okay, what I would like to say is that regardless of what we may or may not do, culture represents how we live as a people. It represents our lifestyle. And as such, culture is going to evolve continuously as long as you have persons sharing the same physical space and interacting. And there has been evolution, and it's going to continue to evolve. But we also need to pay attention to our historical experiences together over a period of time, as well as our experiences even prior to that. And there are certain problems that sometimes are ignored because we speak about the physical impact that that our people have gone through, whether it is on the plantation, whether it is in our communities, whether it is failure to be able to meet our needs, whatever. We look at the physical, and we also talk about the mental, right? But sometimes at a deeper, more fundamental level is the psychological, which is such a more difficult hurdle for us to clear. By so saying, what I'm trying to say as well is that we need to be able to look at the problem itself in the historical context and divine measures that could deal not just with the physical and the mental, but even more so at the psychological, which goes to the deeper factors in terms of how we respond as an individual and how we respond to each other. And having been through some very gruesome experiences like slavery and indentureship and even colonialism, where there was a very strong sense of inferiority, superiority approach to all aspects of life. That psychological impact is still with us, and it has to be addressed if we are going to talk about respecting each other, sharing each other, our cultures with each other. Because if we don't have that full confidence in our own selves, it becomes even much more difficult for that kind of sharing process to exist, for that kind of respect to exist. Because respect for someone else really begins with the respect that you have for your own self and your own value. So that we need to deal with those issues, as well as to get other institutions within the society, whether it is sporting organizations, the media, get the discussion going, get the ideas going, get the healing process in place, so that at least we know 5 years, 10 years down the road, we would have had structures as well as ideas, as well as documentation in place.
Mr. Mohini, you muted. Were you finished? Seem to have a little technical. Okay, there you are.
Yes. Okay. I will close there for now. Yeah, I'll close it.
Thank you, Dr. Rampersad.
Yes, if I may wrap up. Am I? Yes, I'm not muted. I just want to make a piece of information here. In the Marriage Act, I was looking at the Hindu Marriage Act recently, and do you know night weddings used to be the norm in the Hindu community until it was banned. It's actually banned. You cannot, the laws tell you, you can only marry between, I think it's 9 a.m. in the morning to 6 p.m. or something.
6 p.m., yeah.
Yeah, right? So and that, look how that has changed the culture. And with that came music and song and dance for the whole night. All that has changed. So I want to wrap up with saying maybe UTT should put together a team to do cultural sensitization in different places at different times. And let's have a rubric, a nicely developed rubric report card by which we can evaluate ourselves every 5 years, maybe 2 years, whatever. But we need a reporting card according to a rubric, different categories. With that, I want to say this was a wonderful opportunity to begin this conversation. Thank you for having me with you all. Brilliant minds. Thank you. And let me say namaste means I bow to the divinity in all. Namaste.
Thank you. Mr. Arnold?
Thank you. Well, I mean, I think I gave my submission before, but I think that what I would like to leave is by saying we talk, we have a lot of these, but we have got, I think the question, I know I heard when Tima said, well, boy, the cultural, the kind of cultural identity and the kind of identity politics, and he's correct. But we have to find a way, and for me, it's an imperative, and I remember bringing this same topic even before you all with other leaders here in Tobago, because it is something that has to be addressed as a way of policy and the way we operate and how we look at the new social relations that are going to be there. The whole of Crown Point, you can now get Italian food, Chinese food, Syrian, Lebanese, Indo food, Jamaican food. I mean, it's all on the strip, you know, and you now have a choice. But it's more about how we move from, I mean, I choose what food to eat each day. You know, if I want gyro today, if I want Chinese food tomorrow, and I do, you know, but those things, to embrace those changes, we have to address it. If we don't, then we will have the kind of contestations and tensions, right? That will certainly start, you know, and then it will be like, you know, why are the jobs not us? Why it's, and I really think that we have to address those things now. So for me, my line would be, it's an imperative.
Thank you. This was indeed a very enriching panel. We are in the beginning stages, as you said, Senator Timal, we are still in the beginning stages. We're still giving birth. We're still a young country trying to find out who we are, what we are, and how we represent ourselves. And I think conversations like these are moving us in the right direction to open our minds and consider. To build on Dr. Ramprasad's anecdote of the PNM Women's League barbecue and how they pull the whole event, it gives me hope because it suggests that once we do know, once we are told the significance of certain things, we act appropriately. And that's the hope I want to leave everyone with as we close our discussion today. So if we educate, if we tell them, if we sensitize, we will move forward to achieving this multicultural and multiculturalist policy for the nation. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you in the audience for sticking with us. I hope this has given you food for thought to take away. Thank you officially to the university for hosting such a forum. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Leaders Series